You thought you could silence me, but everyone will know the truth. You murdered your brother for this throne.
Silence, witch! God sees her!
Shadows clung to Castle Blackwood as Lady Rosamond stepped through its rusted iron gates. A ruthless alpha commanded these lands, a monarch known for banishing his brides before morning. King Roderick demanded her immediate departure, but a chilling howl from the locked western tower anchored her feet. The wind sweeping off the northern steps was merciless, but it was nothing compared to the chill in the great hall of Castle Blackwood. Lady Rosamond of Aylesbury stood before the obsidian throne, her velvet cloak heavy with melting snow. She was a political sacrifice, offered by her father, Lord Godfrey, to secure grain for their starving pack in the southern valleys. She expected a brutal welcome. She did not expect utter indifference. King Roderick of the Winterfold pack sat slouched against the high back of his throne. He was a terrifying figure of a man, built like a fortress of muscle and scars, with dark hair sweeping over eyes as hard as flint. He did not rise to greet her. He did not offer bread and salt. He merely stared at her, his nostrils flaring slightly as her scent wild lavender and rain hit him. For a fraction of a second, his knuckles turned white where he gripped the armrests. The legendary mate bond, the sacred pull of their kind, was undeniable. It hummed in the freezing air between them. Then, Roderick sneered. "Take her to the eastern spire?" His voice boomed, a deep, gravelly baritone that rattled the ancient tapestries. "Ensure the door is locked from the outside at sundown. The treaty stated I must wed her, not that I must look at her." A collective gasp echoed from the gathered courtiers. Beta Silas, a grizzled warrior with a jagged scar across his throat, stepped forward, his head bowed. "My king, the sun is setting. To banish your true mate on the eve of the binding ceremony." "I have no mate, Silas," Roderick interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Tomorrow, I will sign the decree of annulment. She will remain a guest in the spire until the spring thaw allows her carriage-safe passage back to her father's pathetic lands. The southern pack will get their grain, but they will not get a queen." Rosamond's jaw clenched. She was not a meek, sheltered pup. She had survived famine, border skirmishes, and the harsh realities of pack politics. Taking a bold step forward, she lifted her chin. "I did not travel 300 miles through a blizzard to be dismissed like a stray dog." "Your Grace," Rosamond said, her voice ringing clear and steady. "Our people are bound by the old laws. You cannot annul a true mate bond without facing the judgment of the High Council." Roderick finally stood, his towering frame casting a massive, looming shadow over her. The sheer alpha power rolling off him was suffocating, forcing the surrounding courtiers to their knees. He descended the dais, his boots heavy on the stone, until he was close enough that Rosamond could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "The High Council does not rule Winterfold," he murmured, his face inches from hers. The heat of his body was intoxicating, and Rosamond felt her own inner wolf whimper in desperate submission to her king. "You are a fool to want to stay, Rosamond. This castle is a graveyard for hope. Count your blessings, take your life, and leave." Without another word, he turned his back and strode out of the hall, leaving her standing in the vast, echoing chamber. For the next week, Rosamond was essentially a prisoner in the eastern spire. She was treated with polite reverence by the servants, notably an elderly maid named Beatrice, who brought her meals and stoked her fire. Yet, the isolation was maddening. Every night, exactly at the stroke of midnight, Rosamond was jolted awake by a sound that chilled her blood, a ragged, agonizing howl that seemed to tear through the very foundations of the keep. It was not the howl of a wolf calling to the moon. It was the scream of a beast being tortured. When she questioned Beatrice about the noise, the old woman's hands trembled, spilling hot tea onto the saucer. "It is just the wind in the western canyon, my lady. The king forbids anyone to speak of it. I beg you, do not ask again." But Rosamond was a creature of curiosity and defiance. She needed to know why a king would violently reject his destined mate, and what was crying out in the dark. She began to chart the guard patrols from her window. She noted that Beta Silas and a select group of the king's most trusted guards vanished into the lower levels of the keep every night before the howling began. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, revealing a portrait of a king harboring a massive, terrifying secret. The opportunity to break her confinement came on the night of the new moon. A heavy storm battered the castle, masking the sound of Rosamond picking the rusted lock of the eastern spire with a hairpin she had carefully filed against the hearthstone. Slipping into the dark corridors, she moved like a phantom. The castle was asleep, but the air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural static. She navigated the labyrinthine hallways toward the forbidden western wing, following the faint, metallic scent of iron and something else. Something rotten, like decaying earth. As she rounded a corner near the royal library, a massive hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, pulling her into a dark alcove. Rosamond thrashed, her claws extending, ready to strike. But a familiar scent flooded her senses. It was Roderick. He pinned her against the stone wall, his chest heaving, his body radiating a feverish heat. In the dim light of a lightning flash, she saw his eyes. They were not their usual commanding gold. They were a sick, swirling violet. Veins stood out black against his pale throat. "I told you to stay in your tower," he gritted out, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. He dropped his hand from her mouth but kept her pinned, his immense weight a cage she couldn't escape. "What is happening to you?" she whispered, shocked by the sweat beading on his forehead and the raw pain etching his features. The terrifying, cruel Alpha from the great hall was gone. In his place was a man violently fighting his own body. "You must leave. Tonight," he demanded, leaning his forehead against the stone beside her head. The proximity was agonizing. The mate bond roared between them, a magnetic pull begging them to touch. To claim, Roderick let out a ragged groan, his hands gripping her shoulders, his thumbs unconsciously stroking her collarbone. For a moment, he surrendered, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in her lavender scent as if it were oxygen. "Roderick," she breathed, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. Beneath her palms, his heart was beating at a frantic, unnatural rhythm. "I cannot," he suddenly snarled, violently pushing himself away from her as if burned. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest. "If you stay, you will die. Fording my darkness becomes yours." Before she could stop him, he turned and staggered down the corridor, disappearing behind a heavy, iron-wrought door that led to the lower catacombs. Driven by a mix of fear and an unyielding loyalty to the mate she barely knew, Rosamond waited a few minutes before following him. The air grew colder as she descended the spiraling stone steps into the belly of the keep. The torches here burned with strange, blue flames. She reached a vaulted underground chamber and hid behind a thick stone pillar. The sight before her stole the breath from her lungs. In the center of the room, chained to the floor with massive shackles of enchanted silver, was a werewolf. But it was colossal, twice the size of a normal alpha, its fur matted and gray. The beast thrashed and snapped at the air, foaming at the mouth. Standing just outside the creature's reach was King Roderick. Beside him stood Beta Silas and an old man in the robes of a blood mage. "The lunar rot is progressing, Your Grace," the mage said solemnly, holding a bowl of smoking herbs. "The Queen Dowager's mind is entirely gone. The beast has completely consumed her." Rosamond slapped a hand over her mouth. The monster on the chains. It was Roderick's mother, the legendary Queen Eleanor, who was said to have died peacefully in her sleep 10 years ago. "There must be a way," Roderick demanded, his voice cracking with a desperate, boyish vulnerability that broke Rosamond's heart. "The only way to keep the rot from spreading to the rest of the pack," the mage replied, "is for the Alpha bloodline to act as a siphon. You must continue to draw the curse into yourself, my king, but doing so is destroying you from the inside out. If you take a mate, the bond will share the burden. It will kill her within a month to process this much dark magic." Roderick stared at the feral, snapping beast that used to be his mother. "Then I remain mateless," he said, his voice dropping to a deathly calm. "I will let Rosamond hate me. I will let the realm think me a tyrant. No one must know the royal line is tainted, and I will not let an innocent woman die to ease my pain." He stepped forward, unbuttoning his shirt, revealing a chest covered in black, spreading veins that pulsed with violent magic. He knelt before the raging beast, offering his hands. "Transfer the pain, mage. Give me her agony." Behind the pillar, tears streamed down Rosamund's face. The king who wanted her gone wasn't a monster. He was a martyr, slowly sacrificing his own soul to save his people and his mother. And she was the one woman whose love was literally destined to kill her if he accepted it. Rosamund did not sleep that night. She remained hidden behind the cold stone pillar until the gruesome ritual was complete, watching as the black veins retreated from her king's chest, leaving him pale, exhausted, and trembling on the dungeon floor. Beta Silas and the blood mage, whom she later learned was named Aldous Fenwick, a scholar banished from the high citadel of Oakhaven, carried the semi-conscious Roderick back to his chambers. The next morning, the castle was abuzz with whispered rumors of the king's foul mood. He had ordered the guards to double the watch on the eastern spire, oblivious to the fact that his prisoner had already breached its walls. But Rosamund did not wait for the guards to lock her away again. She intercepted Aldous Fenwick in the castle's dilapidated botanical gardens, cornering the frail man amidst overgrown nightshade and frost-bitten wolfsbane. "I know what is hidden in the catacombs," Rosamund stated, her voice a sharp blade cutting through the crisp morning air. "And I know what the king is doing to himself." Aldous dropped his shears, his face draining of color. "My lady, you speak treason. If the lords of the north discover the Queen Dowager lives as a feral beast, I care little for the lords of the north right now," she interrupted, stepping closer. "I care about the man I am bound to. The lunar rot is a blood curse. Maester Aldous, my father, Lord Godfrey, fought alongside the Eastern mystic healers during the Crimson Rebellion. I have read their texts. A curse of that magnitude requires an anchor, an object, or a person within the castle walls constantly feeding the dark magic." Aldous stared at her, his eyes widening with a mixture of terror and sudden, undeniable hope. "You speak of blood magic, Lady Rosamund. Forbidden arts. We assumed it was a natural affliction passed down from the ancient feral bloodlines. Nothing about this is natural," she countered fiercely. "Who stands to gain if Roderick's body fails? Who ascends the obsidian throne if the Winterfold line falls?" The old mage swallowed hard, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Lord Alistair Sterling. He commands the largest battalion of the Northern Cavalry. He has been vocal about Roderick's refusal to take a mate, claiming the king is weak and unfit to rule without an heir." The pieces fell into a chilling mosaic. Alistair Sterling was poisoning the royal line from within, waiting for Roderick to either succumb to the curse or be overthrown by his own panicked people. Armed with this terrifying truth, Rosamund bypassed the guards and marched directly into the king's solar. Roderick was seated behind a massive oak desk, surrounded by tax ledgers and troop deployments. He looked worse than he had the night before. The violet hue lingered at the edges of his vision, and his broad shoulders sagged under an invisible, crushing weight. He looked up, his expression instantly hardening into a mask of cruel indifference. "I distinctly recall ordering you confined to the spire, Rosamund. My patience for your southern insolence is at an end. Drop the act, Roderick," she said softly, closing the heavy oak doors behind her and locking them with a definitive click. "I was in the catacombs last night. I saw your mother. I saw what you are doing." Roderick froze. The silence in the room became absolute, suffocating. Slowly, the king rose to his feet, a terrifying, predatory grace replacing his former exhaustion. His inner wolf, cornered and desperate, surged to the surface. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, backing her against the heavy wooden door. "You have no idea what you have done," he snarled, his voice vibrating in his chest, sending a thrill of terror and desire straight down her spine. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, my mother will be executed by the High Council, and my pack will be torn apart by civil war." "I am not your enemy," Rosamund cried out, pressing her palms flat against his chest. Even through his linen tunic, his skin was burning, I am your mate, and you are being poisoned from the inside. The curse isn't natural, Roderick. Someone in this castle is feeding it. Lord Alistair Sterling. Roderick's eyes flashed with shock, the gold finally bleeding through the sickly violet. He stepped back, running a trembling hand through his dark hair. Alistair? He fought beside my father. He is my most trusted bannerman. He is waiting for you to die, she insisted, moving toward him. She reached out, her fingers gently grazing his jaw. This time, he didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch with a quiet, agonizing surrender. You cannot fight this alone anymore. Let me help you. If we bind our souls, he whispered, a tear escaping his closed eyes and tracking down his scarred cheek. The magic will rip you apart, Rosamond. I would rather die 1,000 times than watch the light fade from your eyes. I am a daughter of the Southern Valleys, she said, her voice steady and resolute. Our bloodlines are ancient. We do not break so easily. We have 3 days until the blood moon, the night the dark magic will be at its peak. We will find Alistair's anchor, and we will destroy it. Together, for the first time since she had arrived at Castle Blackwood, the king looked at her not as a burden, but as an equal, a queen. He nodded slowly, pulling her into a desperate, bruising embrace. The mate bond flared between them, no longer a source of pain, but a beacon of shared defiance. For 3 days, under the guise of preparing for her departure, Rosamond and Roderick tore the castle apart from the shadows. With the help of Beta Silas and Aldous Fenwick, they searched Alistair Sterling's quarters, the armory, and the ancient crypts. Yet, the anchor eluded them. The curse within Roderick grew more violent, the black veins creeping up his neck, threatening to consume his mind just as it had his mother's. The night of the blood moon descended upon Castle Blackwood, not with a whisper, but with a suffocating, oppressive gravity. The sky above the jagged peaks of the northern steppes transformed into a bruised, terrifying crimson, casting an eerie, unnatural glow through the towering stained-glass windows of the king's solar. The air grew thick, smelling sharply of ozone and melting frost. Rosamond stood beside Roderick, her heart aching as she watched him deteriorate. The king of the Winterfold, renowned for his terrifying strength, was barely able to stand. The violet sickness of the lunar rot had almost completely overtaken the gold of his eyes. Black, necrotic veins pulsed visibly beneath the collar of his linen shirt, climbing his throat like ivy seeking to strangle a mighty oak. He gripped the edge of the stone windowsill, his knuckles white, his chest heaving with ragged, agonizing gasps that sounded like tearing silk. If we fail tonight, Roderick choked out, stubbornly refusing to meet her gaze, fearing his own monstrous reflection in her eyes. Beta Silas has explicit orders to escort you out of the territory under the cover of the vanguard. You are to ride for the Southern Valleys, and you must not look back. Promise me, Rosamond. Before she could form the words to refuse his tragic command, a deafening explosion rocked the very foundation of the ancient keep. The visceral snap of splintering pine and the unmistakable, ringing clash of steel erupted from the lower courtyard. Rosamond rushed to the window, peering through the crimson-tinted glass. In the blood-red light of the courtyard below, chaos had manifested. Lord Alistair Sterling, the Earl of the Western Marches, was leading a massive battalion of rogue northern wolves. Their banners, depicting a severed wolf's head, were raised high in open rebellion. But the true horror was not the traitorous army breaching the gates. Bursting through the heavy, iron-wrought doors of the lower catacombs was Queen Eleanor. Alistair had used the distraction of the siege to bypass the royal guard and shatter the enchanted silver chains that bound the Queen Dowager. The colossal, feral beast was now loose in the open courtyard, a nightmare of matted gray fur and snapping jaws. She tore through loyalists and rebels indiscriminately, her deafening roars shaking the very stones of the castle, echoing with a decade of tortured madness. "No!" Roderick rasped, stumbling away from the window, his massive frame swaying dangerously. "I have to stop her. The blood moon is amplifying the rot. I have to siphon the rest of the magic tonight, or she will slaughter every soul in this keep." "It will kill you!" Rosamond screamed, lunging forward and grabbing his arm. His skin was blistering hot to the touch, vibrating with unstable dark magic. "I am already dead, Rosamond," he whispered. With a gentle but immovable force, he peeled her fingers from his arm. He unsheathed his heavy broadsword, his eyes entirely consumed by the violet curse, and charged out of the room, leaving a trail of freezing shadow in his wake. Rosamond did not hesitate. The ancient texts of Lord Thomas Errington, which her father kept in their southern library, spoke of the blood moon's requirement for a living, breathing tether. She grabbed a silver hunting dagger from Roderick's desk and sprinted after him, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. The stone corridors were a labyrinth of panic, filled with the choking smoke of burning tapestries and the heavy, metallic stench of fresh blood. She fought her way through the descending madness, slipping past clashing guards, arriving at the overlooking balcony of the courtyard just as Roderick threw himself between the feral queen and a group of terrified, cornered servants. Roderick dropped his sword. The clang of the steel hitting the cobblestones cut through the roar of battle. He did not raise a hand against his mother. Instead, the Alpha King dropped to his knees in the blood-soaked snow, opening his arms wide, surrendering his body completely to the lethal dark magic radiating from the monstrous beast. "Take it!" Roderick roared over the din of the siege, the black veins surging up his face, turning his skin an ashen gray. "Give it all to me!" The feral queen paused, her glowing, mindless eyes locking onto her son. The dark magic crackled through the freezing air, visibly arcing from the beast to Roderick in thick, violent tendrils of black smoke. Roderick screamed a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that brought the surrounding battle to a horrifying standstill. Alistair Sterling watched from the back of his massive warhorse, a cruel, triumphant smile twisting his scarred lips as the king began to collapse into the snow. In that frozen second, looking at Alistair's unnatural calm amid the magical storm, Rosamond realized the terrifying truth. She couldn't find a cursed object in his quarters because the anchor wasn't a totem or a relic. It was Alistair himself. He was a hidden blood mage, masking his scent and his vile arts beneath his heavy iron armor. He was actively channeling the celestial power of the blood moon to amplify the rot, acting as the living bridge for the curse, ensuring it would destroy both the king and the queen dowager in one swift, devastating stroke. She had exactly one chance to save the man she loved. Rosamond vaulted over the low stone wall of the balcony, landing hard in the snowdrifts below. She sprinted across the chaotic battlefield, dodging the clashing swords of Silas and the bewildered rebels. She didn't run toward Alistair's horse. She ran directly into the lethal epicenter of the magical storm, throwing herself onto the freezing ground beside her dying mate. "Rosamond, no!" Roderick choked out, black blood spilling from his lips, his body convulsing as the magic tore at his heart. "Get away! It will take you too." "I am your mate," she declared, her voice ringing across the silent courtyard with absolute, unbreakable authority. "And you will never fight in the dark alone again." She grabbed his ruined face with both hands, ignoring the searing burn of the corrupted magic against her skin, and crashed her lips onto his. The physical sealing of a true mate bond during the apex of a blood moon was a legend spoken of only in hushed, frightened whispers by the oldest elders. As their lips met, a shockwave of blinding, pure white light erupted from their combined forms, throwing the nearest soldiers off their feet. The mate bond, suppressed, denied, and starved for weeks, snapped into place with the explosive force of a falling star. The dark magic that was slamming into Roderick immediately flooded into Rosamond. It felt like swallowing jagged glass and liquid fire. The pain was entirely beyond human comprehension, threatening to shatter her mind into a million irreparable pieces. But as the dark magic hit the ancient, unbroken lineage of her southern bloodline, it met an immovable, towering wall of ancestral, purifying light. Instead of consuming her, the bond acted as a flawless conduit. The combined, desperate strength of an Alpha King and his fully realized true mate, amplified by the purity of her uncorrupted lineage, created a violent, magical feedback loop. The white light intensified, blinding the onlookers, pushing back the violet sickness with the force of a tidal wave. A sudden, blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It came from Alistair Sterling, because he was the living anchor of the curse. The purification magic traveling between Roderick and Rosamond violently reversed its course, shooting back up the invisible connection to its source. The dark magic Alistair had harbored within his own veins turned instantly, catastrophically volatile. Before the eyes of his horrified, paralyzed rebellion, Alistair Sterling burst into towering violet flames. The traitorous lord shrieked as his armor melted, his body turning to fine, gray ash in a matter of seconds, scattered into nothingness by the biting winter wind. With the living anchor destroyed, the source of the lunar rot was permanently severed. The blinding white light slowly faded from the courtyard, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in its wake. Rosamond collapsed heavily against Roderick's broad chest, gasping desperately for the freezing air, her entire body trembling with profound exhaustion. Beneath her cheek, Roderick's heart beat with a strong, steady, and triumphant rhythm. The black veins had vanished completely from his skin. His eyes, when they flew open in sudden panic, were a brilliant, untainted, luminous gold. He wrapped his massive, trembling arms around her, burying his face in her wild hair, openly weeping into her neck as the snow fell around them. "You foolish, impossibly brave, beautiful creature," he sobbed, holding her so tightly she could barely draw breath, though she never wanted him to let go. "You saved me. You saved us all." A soft, confused whimper drew their attention through the clearing smoke. Lying a few feet away, curled in the snow, was a frail, elderly woman. The colossal, terrifying beast was gone. Queen Eleanor, though exhausted and shivering, looked up at her son with clear, remarkably human eyes for the first time in 10 years. "Roderick?" she whispered, her voice fragile, like dry autumn leaves. The rebellion, having just witnessed the divine, terrifying display of the mate bond and the fiery, instantaneous death of their leader, immediately dropped their weapons. To a man, they fell to their knees in the bloody snow in absolute, unquestioning submission. Beta Silas rushed forward, stripping off his heavy fur cloak and throwing it gently over the shivering Queen Mother. The siege was broken. The curse was dead. Roderick stood slowly, lifting Rosamond effortlessly into his arms. He looked out over his kneeling, awe-struck people, his golden eyes blazing with a renewed, unshakable alpha command that demanded absolute fealty. But as he looked down at the fierce southern woman in his arms, the woman who had willingly walked into the abyss and dragged his soul back to the light, his hardened gaze softened into pure, profound reverence. Ultimately, the shadows of Castle Blackwood were banished, not by the strength of a king's sword, but by the relentless courage of a queen's heart. Rosamond and Roderick's reign became a golden era of unity, bridging the divided packs of the North and South. Their legendary bond proved that even the darkest, most terrifying secrets can be dismantled when met with unwavering loyalty and an audacious, fearless love.
Hi, my name is King's Obsession Concord, the owner and manager of King's Obsession Concord. After watching the video, the Alpha King wanted her gone, until she uncovered his darkest secret. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the tension between distrust and vulnerability. At first, it felt like the Alpha King wanted to push her away completely, but once secrets started coming to light, the emotional balance between them changed in a really interesting way. I think stories like this connect with people because they remind us that the people who act the coldest are sometimes hiding the deepest pain or fear underneath. Do you think the Alpha King pushed her away to protect himself, or because he was afraid someone would discover the truth about him? And if you uncovered something deeply personal about someone, would it make you trust them more or pull away from them? I think stories like this remind us that understanding another person often requires patience, empathy, and looking beyond the surface. If this story kept you emotionally invested, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories filled with mystery, tension, and unexpected connection, feel free to like and subscribe only if you'd like to see more.